Hello, everyone, and welcome to GameSpot's 2014 coverage. I'm Tom McShay, and this is Kevin Van Ord right beside me. Kevin, you played the strangest cooking sim on the show floor. It's called Grey Goo, and it is a simulation of your own experience in the kitchen. Can you just tell us a little bit about this?
Well, you see, my refrigerator's covered with this stuff inside, and I call it the Grey Goo because
Lord.
it's sort of... No, seriously.
Chinese food and milk.
Yeah.
So it's actually a real-time strategy game, RTS, for the kids.
Yes, it is, and it's
Yeah.
coming from Petroglyph, the people well known for games like Universe at War and Star Wars Empire at War. So they know their RTSs, and they're trying to get back to the sort of old school RTS. Back in the days when there were lots of games that were building on the Age of Empires formula and on Command and Conquer and on StarCraft and so on and so forth. So this is a game that really harks back to those days. And so you've got 3 different factions, and one of them is human, one of them is beta, and one of them is called the Goo. It's called the Grey Goo, and that's where the title comes from. Now, in science fiction parlance, Grey Goo is basically what happens when nanobots just take over the world, basically, and everything turns into Grey Goo.
It's the after effect of Call of Duty Advanced Warfare.
Yes, sort of.
Okay.
Yes. And so one of the factions, and this is the faction that I played today in the playable demo, was I played as the Goo, because I'd never really played anything like that. And the Goo is a faction that does not have a base. So all of the units that you create comes from this big blob of goo that you can take around. And to collect resources, you take their big thing of goo and go over top of the resource, and you immediately collect them. You don't have to send out a unit to collect resources for you. You just take your, think of the goo as maybe like a mobile base. But eventually, you split the goo. So you can split the goo, and then
There's so many euphemisms going on right now.
I know, right? But you split the goo, and then you can turn it into different units, and they can be, they can be flying units, they can be ground units, and then you can also create more goos, and you can also sort of upgrade using a tech tree as well, and all of that stuff costs you the same resources that you're collecting on the map. But there's no base building when you play as the Goo. And it's really interesting because the Goo also, besides being sort of your mobile base where everything comes from, the Goo is also its own attack unit. Like if you order it to cross units, it will just suck them up and dissolve them. It's really cool to watch. So I had a lot of fun. I just played against the AI. I had two main Goo units, the Mother Goo, is I think what they actually call it. And so I'm taking my one Mother Goo around, collecting resources, and then splitting off units. And I'm using the other Goo as an attack unit and for upgrades and stuff. And so I'm taking it around and just dissolving units. And it was actually a lot of fun. And the game has a really good sci-fi look to it. I like the way the beta looks. The beta faction is really cool to look at too. And even the humans. Now nobody wants to play. Humans are so boring. But humans in this game look really interesting. They're sort of your turtling faction. So if you're into staying at the base and being defensive, you're human. If you kind of want to split between being aggressive and defensive, you play as the beta. And if you're totally aggressive, you play as the Goo, and you just get in there. You start moving. You can try to rush. Although you have to be careful because if you're, it might be tempting to try to Zerg the Goo, if that's a thing, I guess I could say. But if you try to Zerg rush with your initial piece of goo, you're going to be in trouble because that's your only means of collecting resources. That's the only thing you have when you start the game. So it might be tempting to try to just send that goo out there, but it's probably not necessarily going to function if you try to do that, because that thing's just, let's say, your only thing. You've got, everything comes from the goo.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for giving us all of the information.
Remember that advice. Everything comes from the goo.
Yeah, keep watching GameSpot, where we promise not to talk about goo in the future.